What are we actually talking about when we say dopamine? And why has dopamine detox turned into a modern ritual for men who feel tired, distracted, flat, or out of control? In this video, I'm going to explain what dopamine really does, why we need it and cannot live without it, and why so much of the dopamine detox content online is built on myths that sound scientific, but miss the real mechanism. We're going to go through the most common dopamine detox myths one by one, some phrases that are repeated, why they feel convincing, what's actually happening underneath, and how to move toward a version of detox that creates calm and focus without turning your life into a punishment ritual. And we're going to do it the inner helm way. No moral panic, no hard men don't feel, no shame, just clarity, regulation, and direction. Dopamine is often introduced as the pleasure chemical. That phrase is simple. It's catchy. It's also the reason most people misunderstand dopamine from the start. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure in the way some people frame it. Dopamine is more like a system of orientation. It points, it highlights, it marks things as important. It creates the sense that something is worth moving toward. It's not only "I like this," it's "this matters enough to pursue." Dopamine is involved in motivation, curiosity, anticipation, reward prediction, reinforcement learning, and the drive to act. Dopamine is what makes you lean forward mentally. It's what makes you want to check. It's what makes you want to chase. It's what makes effort feel possible. Think about the last time you were genuinely interested in something. Not forced, not dragging yourself. Actually interested. There was a pull, a little energy, a sense of, "I want to see what happens." That is dopamine at work. Now think about the last time you were bored in a way that felt heavy. Not relaxed boredom. The restless kind. The kind where your body wants to reach for something. The kind where silence feels too open and you need a stimulus to fill it. That also involves dopamine. Not because dopamine is bad, but because dopamine is the system that tries to move you away from nothingness and towards something that feels meaningful, stimulating, or rewarding. So dopamine is not evil. Dopamine is not a toxin. Dopamine is not the enemy of discipline. Dopamine is a core part of being alive. You cannot remove dopamine and become calmer. You cannot flush dopamine out and become more focused. A person with no dopamine function doesn't become a stoic monk. They become unable to initiate. They struggle to move. They struggle to pursue. They struggle to care. Dopamine is not just a modern addiction chemical. It is part of your survival architecture. And this matters because the entire dopamine detox culture is built around the idea that dopamine is some modern drug problem. But dopamine existed long before phones existed. Dopamine existed when men hunted, when men built shelter, when men pursued women, when men trained skill, when men gained status, when men protected family. Dopamine is the engine that makes pursuit possible. So when you hear someone say dopamine detox, the real question is not, how do I remove dopamine? Because that is nonsense. The real question is, what has my dopamine system been trained to chase? And equally important, what has my dopamine system stopped responding to because of constant artificial stimulation? Because dopamine is a training system. It learns what reliably produces a signal. It reinforces what works. It doesn't care if the thing is noble or shallow. It doesn't care if it builds your life or drains it. It cares about reliability and intensity. If you train a dog by giving it treats every time it touches a button, the dog will touch the button more. The dog doesn't question whether touching the button leads to a better life. It learns what works. In the same way, your brain learns what produces reward signals. And modern life is full of buttons, small ones, fast ones, portable ones, endless ones. Before we break down the myths, you have to understand why they spread so easily. These myths spread because they are emotionally satisfying. They offer men something they desperately want, a simple explanation for a complex feeling. A lot of men feel something like this. I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I'm not as motivated as I want to be. I'm tired, but I'm restless. I'm busy, but I feel behind. I consume content constantly, yet I feel empty. I can work hard for short bursts, but my attention collapses. I know what I should do, but I can't initiate. I can start, but I can't sustain. That is not one problem. That's a bundle. It includes attention, nervous system regulation, meaning, identity, self-trust, habit loops, anxiety, and sometimes depression. But the myth gives men a single villain: dopamine. If dopamine is the villain, then the fix becomes simple: detox. And if the fix is simple, then control feels possible again. That is the psychological reason this content has spread. It's not that the idea is entirely useless. It's that the idea is often packaged in a way that turns men into soldiers fighting their own nervous system. And that never ends well. Now let's move along with a personal experience. I still get up every morning and look at my phone. I check social media. I scroll. And that dopamine boost gives me enough energy to wake up and get out of bed. A harsh dopamine detox channel would hear that and say, "That's addiction. That's weakness. That's a sign you have nothing to live for. You're empty. You're fried. You're losing your masculinity." That's exactly the kind of content I'm dismantling here. Because the truth is simpler and less dramatic. When you wake up, your brain moves from sleep to alertness. That transition has friction. For many men, the phone becomes a lever that reduces that friction. It's not just pleasure. It's initiation. It's activation. It's stimulation that tells your nervous system, "Wake up, something is happening." Now, is that ideal? Not necessarily. But is it proof you have no meaning in your life? No, it is proof that your brain has learned a pattern. Phone equals activation. The important question becomes, do you have other activation sources? Do you have a morning structure that produces a sense of direction before the phone takes over? Do you have a reason to move that doesn't depend on a feed? If the phone is your only ignition, then yes, you will feel dependent. But if the phone is one ignition among many, it becomes less powerful. You regain authorship. That's already a clue to how Inner Helm approaches this topic, not moral panic. Pattern recognition. Another example is the fact that I play games on my phone for hours. At home, on the toilet, at work, literally everywhere. Again, the myth will often frame this as dopamine addiction. And perhaps it is. But you can't diagnose yourself through a slogan. You have to look at function. What does the game do for you? Does it calm you? Does it distract you? Does it help you avoid discomfort? Does it create a sense of progress that your real life doesn't give you right now? Does it produce tiny wins that feel cleaner than the uncertainty of real goals? Games are engineered to provide clear feedback, clear progress, low stakes, and constant reinforcement. For a nervous system that feels pressured, unclear, or under-rewarded, games are an easy refuge. So the question isn't, why are you weak? The question is, what is your nervous system getting from this that your life is not providing? Some men are escaping boredom. Some men are escaping anxiety. Some men are escaping the feeling of failure. Some men are escaping loneliness. Some men are escaping responsibility. Some men are escaping meaninglessness. Some men are escaping the heaviness of uncertain goals. And until you identify what the game is covering, any detox becomes a performance. And performance cannot cure whatever reason that lies beneath the surface of the dopamine hits that you getting on a regular basis. If your dopamine addiction is getting in front of your daily life, the chances are that you will not be able to get over it with a detox. Carry on listening to find out what can be done to cope. Now let's go over the myths. Myth 1. Dopamine is the problem. How the myth goes. Dopamine is addictive. Dopamine is frying your brain. Dopamine is making you weak. Dopamine is why you can't focus. Why this feels true. Men feel out of control and want a chemical explanation. Dopamine becomes the scapegoat. It's easy to blame a molecule because a molecule doesn't demand self-examination. It doesn't demand emotional honesty. It doesn't demand that you admit you're anxious, lonely, or directionless. It only demands a ritual. And a ritual feels masculine. A ritual feels clean. A ritual feels like action. What's actually happening? Dopamine is not the enemy. Dopamine is how motivation exists at all. If dopamine were the problem, you would be better off without it. But you wouldn't be better off. You would be inert. The real issue is usually constant novelty, fast reward loops, no recovery time for your nervous system, too many stimuli competing for attention, too little meaning anchoring you. When you're constantly consuming, your baseline shifts. Normal tasks feel less rewarding because the contrast has been destroyed. It's not that dopamine is too high. It's that your brain expects a level of stimulation that real life cannot match without effort. If every few seconds your phone gives you something new, then reading a book will feel slow. If every minute gives you a small reward, then working toward a long-term goal will feel unrewarding. If your reward system is trained on constant novelty, then stillness feels like deprivation. So no, dopamine is not the problem. The problem is training and contrast. The problem isn't dopamine. The problem is urgency without meaning. When everything matters immediately, nothing feels satisfying. When your nervous system is trained to chase constant signals, it becomes hard to sit inside quiet effort. This myth dies when you stop seeing dopamine as poison and start seeing your attention as something you can train. Myth 2. If you detox, motivation magically returns. How the myth goes. Do 7 days. Do 30 days. After a week, you'll feel unstoppable. Your motivation will come back. Why this sells? Men love timelines because timelines reduce uncertainty. A timeline says, suffer for 7 days and you will be rewarded. It turns discomfort into a transaction. And many men have been trained to think of life as a transaction. If I endure enough pain, I earn enough strength. This is one of the most seductive myths in masculine self-improvement. Reality. Motivation doesn't disappear because dopamine is high. Motivation disappears when effort feels pointless, when attention is fragmented, and when goals lack internal ownership. If your goals are vague, or borrowed, or built around proving yourself, motivation will not stick. If you remove stimulation, you might feel clearer for a few days. But clarity is not the same as direction. It's possible to have a quiet mind and still not know what you want. Detox removes noise. It doesn't create meaning. But here is the key point. If you are motivated enough to place something meaningful in the space that detox creates, your dopamine doesn't vanish. It reroutes. You start getting dopamine from social interactions that are real, not performative. Work achievements that have substance. Physical goals like training, building, improving your body. Learning something that matters. Building competence. This is where dopamine detox becomes useful. Not as deprivation, but as reallocation. This is winner mentality at play. The point is not to detox forever. The point is to stop living like your attention is owned by whatever screams loudest. Finding a clear path and meaning is up to you, and only you can motivate yourself to find it. Myth 3. Pleasure is weakness. How the myth goes. Pleasure makes men soft. Hard men avoid pleasure. Discipline means deprivation. Comfort is the enemy. Why this resonates. Because many men carry shame around desire. They want permission to hate their own needs. They want a philosophy that turns numbness into virtue. This myth spreads because it flatters a man's ego. It says, if you deny yourself, you are superior. It makes suffering feel like status. What's actually happening? Avoiding pleasure doesn't create control. It creates tension, and tension leaks. Men who moralize pleasure often binge later. They swing between extremes because they are not regulating. They are suppressing. They are usually susceptible to become rigid and brittle. They lose softness in the nervous system, and then they wonder why they feel like they're living inside a clenched fist. This is why Inner Helm rejects the hard men ideology. I am not trying to turn you into stone. I am trying to turn you into someone who can feel and still lead himself. The pursuit of happiness is not a sin. We live to build, to connect, to enjoy, to experience. Happiness is not weakness. Being pleased is not weakness. What ruins men is compulsion and excess, not pleasure itself. A relevant Buddhist point fits here without turning this into spiritual theater. Suffering arises when we cling, when we attach, when we cannot let go. Pleasure is not the enemy. Attachment without awareness is. The problem is not that you enjoy something. The problem is when you can't stop, when you can't choose, when you are being pulled. Control isn't refusing pleasure. Control is not being compelled. Don't be afraid to be happy. Don't be afraid to enjoy. But become honest about excess. Excess of anything becomes a substitute for something missing. Excess becomes cover. Excess becomes anesthesia. Your job is not to become joyless. Your job is to become sovereign. Myth 4. Boredom is the goal. How the myth goes. Sit in boredom. Force boredom. Boredom is where men are made. Embrace emptiness. Why this appeals. Boredom feels like proof of discipline. It feels like I'm doing something hard. It becomes another performance. Men can post about it. Men can announce it. Men can measure it. What's missing? Boredom itself doesn't rewire anything. Boredom is a symptom of a nervous system that expects stimulation. It is not a trophy. What matters is what happens when boredom appears. Do you panic? Do you reach for a substitute? Do you stay present long enough for the discomfort to change shape? Think about meditation as an analogy. Meditation is not just sitting. The hardest part is reaching the point where nothing is happening and you can't distract yourself. When you try to meditate, your mind will flood you with thoughts, urges, memories, impulses, and plans. That doesn't mean meditation is failing. That means you are seeing the machine. Boredom training is similar. When you remove stimulation, your nervous system doesn't become calm instantly. It becomes loud. It becomes restless. It becomes demanding. And in that demanding phase, many men assume something is wrong. But what's happening is exposure. The mind is revealing how addicted it is to motion. Once you pass that threshold, something shifts. You stop needing constant input. You stop fearing the quiet. And in that quiet, honest reflection can occur. Decisions can form. Not forced decisions. Not productive decisions. Real ones. The key is that boredom is not an end state. It is a doorway. It is the moment before clarity. It is the mind begging for distraction. If you hold steady, the begging fades. The goal is not to stare at a wall like punishment. The goal is to be able to sit in silence without needing to run. Myth 5. Dopamine detox builds willpower. How the myth goes. Endure discomfort and willpower increases. You become stronger. This is how men are made. Why men like this? It feels masculine. It feels earned. It feels measurable. and it fits the culture of proving yourself through pain. The flaw: willpower is limited. Regulation is renewable. Willpower is a resource you spend. Regulation is a system you build. Men who rely on willpower burn out. They relapse. They turn discipline into identity. They feel constant pressure. They begin living with an internal drill sergeant. And eventually, the drill sergeant collapses because no one can be screamed into calm. A calm man doesn't spend all day resisting temptation. A calm man is not being pulled as often. His environment is cleaner. His triggers are fewer. His life has rhythm. His nervous system is less starved. His attention is not constantly under attack. Here's the deeper truth. Reducing stimulation lowers internal push. It doesn't magically increase resistance. When you remove constant triggers, you don't have to fight as much. You're not stronger in the dramatic sense. You are less harassed. This is why we don't worship grit here. We build stability. Stability is quieter and more sustainable than brute willpower. Myth 6. Everyone needs a dopamine detox. How the myth goes: every man should detox. This is the modern solution. If you're not detoxing, you're behind. Why it spreads? It universalizes pain. It simplifies complexity. It turns a nuanced issue into a mass product. Reality: some men are overstimulated. Others are underengaged. Others are anxious, not distracted. Some men use stimulation as entertainment. Some men use stimulation as anesthesia. For some, detox helps immediately. For others, detox creates emptiness and rumination. If you remove stimulation and your mind becomes darker, louder, more anxious, you may not need more boredom. You may need regulation, support, structure, and sometimes professional help. Honestly, if you're watching a video about dopamine detox, there's a good chance you may need some kind of recalibration. Yet just being here means you're humble enough to admit something isn't working. That alone separates you from the "I don't need help from anyone" posture that keeps a lot of men stuck. Some men would rather suffer in private than admit they're being dragged by a pattern. But if you're listening, you're already in motion. Hit that like button and leave a comment if this video has managed to touch you, and you would like to see more content with this mentality. Getting back on the subject at hand, stimulation isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's the cover. And if it's the cover, detox likely won't be enough unless you understand what's underneath. What dopamine detox should mean for men. Now I want to clarify what a grounded dopamine detox actually looks like, because many men hear detox and think it must be extreme. They think they must delete everything, isolate, suffer, and become rigid for 7 days. That's not regulation. That's performance. A grounded dopamine recalibration looks more like this. You reduce the loudest inputs first, not all inputs. You remove the highest frequency triggers that hijack attention. You create breathing room. And then you deliberately replace the space with something that creates real reward, real competence, and real stability. This is important. If you remove stimulation but replace it with nothing, there's a good chance you will feel empty, and that emptiness will feel like failure. It is not failure. It is the moment where your brain asks, "So what do we live for then?" That question is the point. That question is where the real work begins. Because the deepest benefit of detox is not more focus. The deepest benefit is a return of honest desire. Not craving. Desire. The difference is subtle. Craving is urgent. Desire is clean. Craving feels like compulsion. Desire feels like choice. The goal is not to become numb. The goal is to become less driven by urgent craving and more guided by clean desire. Let's go back to my morning phone habit. If you, like me, wake up and the first thing you do is scroll, it's easy to shame yourself. But Inner Helm doesn't do that. We ask, what is this solving? It's solving initiation friction. It's an ignition. So instead of I'm weak, the more useful question becomes, what other ignition can I create that is less hijacking? That could be simple. It could be a morning rule, like water first, light exposure, a short walk to the kitchen, one small task, then phone. Not punishment, just sequence. And the reason sequence works is because the brain is a pattern machine. If you always choose phone first, phone becomes the trigger for waking. If you build another trigger, the dependency weakens. About my mobile gaming habit. If you are anything like me, games fill the gaps everywhere. Ask, where are the gaps? Gaps are where anxiety enters. Gaps are where uncertainty enters. Gaps are where silence enters. Games are a cover for gaps. So instead of I must delete games, the deeper approach is, what happens in the gap if the game is not there? Do you feel restlessness? Do you feel fear? Do you feel boredom? Do you feel loneliness? Do you feel nothingness? Your answer tells you what the game is doing. That's just information, nothing to be shamed about. Conclusion. How to decide if you need a detox. You need to determine first whether you need a dopamine detox, and you do that by looking for signs that resemble addiction, inability to function normally, or a compulsive loop that interferes with daily life. Here are grounded signs you may need recalibration, not as a moral judgment, but as an honest signal. You reach for stimulation automatically without choosing. You feel irritable or restless when you can't access it. You lose track of time repeatedly. You use it to avoid tasks, conversations, or emotions. Your attention collapses when things become slow. Your sleep is affected. You feel unable to enjoy low-stimulation activities. You feel life is flat unless you're consuming something. If several of those are true, you likely need a break. Not a punishment break, a recalibration break. Then you decide how long. Not because 7 days is magic, but because habits need interruption long enough for the nervous system to stop expecting immediate reward. For some men, it's a weekend. For some, it's a week. For some, it's 30 days with a gradual reintroduction. And the key instruction you gave is crucial. Constantly ask yourself whether the compulsion could come back any day, not as paranoia, as awareness. If your system feels like it's still waiting for the next hit, you're not regulated yet. You're just abstaining. Do not repress anything. Do not bore yourself to death. Do not punish yourself. Those approaches can backfire and leave you worse. They build resentment toward your own life. They create a good days versus bad days identity. They turn calm into a performance. Instead, ease into the detox. Make it a part of your life, not a boot camp. The goal is a new relationship with stimulation, not a war against it. Dopamine is not your enemy. Dopamine is your engine. Your job is not to destroy the engine. Your job is to decide where it takes you. And if you've made it this far, you already have the quality that makes this work. Honesty. You're not pretending you're above this conversation. You're looking directly at what's pulling you. That is where real control begins. Calm is not achieved by deprivation. Calm is revealed when urgency loses its leverage. And that happens when you create direction, reduce noise, and learn how to sit inside the gaps without running. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe.